I'm going to veneer the back with some curly maple on the show side and some regular maple veneer on the back side. I'm using 3/8 inch plywood as a substrate, and before I do the veneering, what I want to do is square up a piece of this. It's oversized. I will then do the veneering and leave the veneer just slightly undersized from this so that I have good reference edges, and then later on it'll make it a whole lot easier to trim this up square to the exact size I need. So I've got my big crosscut sled, and it's supported in the back by a roller so that I can go on through. I also have a piece of 3/4 inch particle board here to support this offcut, and that board will go sliding right along with the piece as I go through the saw. And that way my offcut doesn't fall and cause any kind of binding. Okay, with the piece cut, the way I'll check for square, I won't use an actual square. I'm going to use the diagonals method. And here I'm measuring on diagonal 49 3/16. And on this diagonal, I'm measuring 49 3/16. So I've got it perfectly square. From now on, this will be my reference for sizing up the back. My client really likes this very light curly maple. And I have a number of slices from a lot that I've kept in order as they've been sliced off the log. So here's piece number 11, here's piece number 12, book match to it, then 13 and 14. And I believe that if I cut these to the length I need, 30 inches, and then trim the edges, that I'll get the required 39-inch width that I need, and I can veneer the face, the show side of the 3/8 inch plywood. I'll do the same thing with some plain maple veneer that I have. You can't see it, but it's over here on my bench. Also, numbered in the stack so that it can book match as well, although it won't quite look as good as the the curly maple, of course, and it'll be up against a wall also, so you really won't be able to see much. But anyway, I'll go ahead and go through that whole process with you. Now, to cut the veneer, I'm using the veneer saw, so named because it looks like a saw, but it's really not so much of a saw as it is a series of little razor teeth. The idea is to have these razor teeth just slice through the veneer. So you don't really do a sawing motion, you do a pulling motion. I've got a piece of scrap plywood down here as a backer, and another piece of MDF as a guide. I've taped up the edges of the veneer, the 4 pieces, so that they don't slide around. And I've made my line, so then I'll just go ahead and just gently start a series of pulls with some light pressure. You can tell when it's cutting through the veneer. You can hear it. There's a piece. One of the most important things to do to get a successful paneled, veneered panel when you're doing these book matches is to make sure the edges of your veneer are perfectly straight and square. just cutting with the veneer saw is not good enough. You need to plane these edges. So what I've done is I've made a little jig here where I can take my ganged up 4 pieces of veneer. I can place them between the jaws here. I'm just going to try to center the veneer in here and then just poke it through just enough where I can plane the edge. Okay, once you have it about where you want it, you just go ahead and tighten up these through bolts. And when I built this, I made the strong back just a little bit with a little bit of crown in it, so it would try to bring down the veneer in the center just as well as on the ends. Feels pretty good. Tighten that up. Then I take this over and put it into the vise. Okay, so I've put it into my vise here. I've got my plane. I'm using a 50-degree angle iron because this curly maple is likely to tear out some. And I just start planing the edge. And now when you're making up your panels, the show face is going to be the side you tape up. That makes it so that the glue face doesn't have any tape on it to interfere with the glue joint. And I've got one pair of panels taped up already. But how did I get there? Well, the first thing I had to do is flip this over. And on the glue face, I had to do some temporary taping with just a little bit of blue masking tape. And this will hold these pieces together in the right registration so that when I do the taping with the veneer tape, it'll be easy to do. Now the veneer tape comes in a roll like this. It's very thin paper tape with a water activated adhesive on one side. And so all you got to do is flip this piece back over. And then I've cut up a whole bunch of little pieces of tape that I can use as cross pieces to work my way up and tie this all together. So I'll just go ahead and wet the tape, and starting at the very bottom, put my 2 pieces of veneer together nice and tightly, and then work my way up about every 3 inches or so, putting another piece of tape. And this way I can keep the joint nice and tight. Also, as the tape dries, it'll shrink a little bit and it'll pull the joint together even tighter. The idea is to have a invisible joint. All right. Now, the last piece of tape is just a long one to go the full length. So I've already pre-cut some of these. I'll go ahead and wet them on my sponge. And then carefully lay it in place. I think it's also important to note that you only want to put the amount of tape on that you actually need to hold this together, because you're going to have to take all this tape off later. Okay, there's the second joint. I'll just go ahead and do the same thing on the third. Okay, I'm going to glue up the back panel veneers using a vacuum bag, and I've got a custom-made vacuum call system here. Consists of 2 parts. You can see this first part's a big thick piece of particle board with you know, a smooth surface on each side, and I've cut grooves to allow the air to circulate. This whole thing's going to go inside the bag. The work then goes in here, and on top of the work goes the top caul that also has the slots glued in it, but a smooth side. And that smooth side is coated, it's like a melamine coat so that the glue won't stick to it. This piece is exactly the right width for what I need, so I'm lucky. But it's cool right now. Today's February 20th, and the shop goes down to 60 degrees at night. So I've got to warm it up, and the reason is Unibond 800 is the glue I'm going to use, and that's a two-part glue, a catalyst and a resin. But the temperature has to be 70 degrees or it won't set, and I know that for a fact. Early on, probably 10 years ago, I glued up a leg that was under stress, and I wasn't real careful about the temperature, and I dropped below the required, I think it was 70 at the time, and the laminate just came apart. So I'm warming up the shop right now, but what I'm really going to do is put an electric blanket on this. I bought an electric blanket 10 years ago for this very purpose, so that I could warm up my platen, and then I'll put the piece of plywood in here too. Warm that up ahead of time, and then when I put the glue on, I'll use the blanket on top of that with a moving blanket over the whole thing. So let me show you how that works. We'll just let that sit for a few hours while I go do something else.